You are watching Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. Very recently, I was at Trade, the body under the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, to moderate an event for the E-National Exporters Day. On the panel, it's actually quite distinguished because I had with me Tan Sri Andrew Sheng, who is of the Hong Kong Futures Exchange fame and Bank Negara fame. He is currently the chair of Georgetown Institute of Open Advanced Studies. Also on the panel, we have had a very illustrious list of individuals, including that of Nimal Manuel, the senior partner and managing partner of McKinsey in Malaysia, Datuk Daud Bakar, of course the chairman of AWANI Advisors, as well as of Bank Negara, as well as the Sharia Committee of the Securities Commission, and none other than the CEO of Serba Dynamic Holdings Berhad, Datuk Dr. Abdul Karim Abdullah, to discuss a whole range of issues pertaining to the issues involving exporters in 2020. We all know that COVID-19 is a troubling year for many of our SMEs, from micro SMEs, small to medium sized. So this panel is here to talk about two things: the crisis itself, as well as the opportunities that lie within. Enjoy this panel.
A lot of people is putting something like, oh, we are a Malaysian company. People still look very highly on people based on their skin, their hair, and so on. But we tell everybody that look at the history of China. China is known as a country which at one time is branded as products no quality, services no quality, not meeting the expectations and the quality as compared to Western technology. But look at today, how they have actually persevered, they serve and move forward and become the world leader of today. So it means that the world is looking towards results rather than mentality and mindset at the moment. And Malaysian as a country, I always said Malaysians are very, very lucky. And Malaysians are very pampered, because when we invited them to join us in our overseas journey, struggle and so on, a lot of them are reluctant. So why is that? So because there's so much that they can gain as a Malaysian citizen working in Malaysia. So I would say that those who complain about less opportunity, no wealth in Malaysia, I don't think that is true. Malaysia is a country with a lot of diversity, with a lot of opportunity, and that is why a lot of Malaysians are pampered to be in Malaysia rather than going overseas. So point number two, the innovation part of it. If we have technology, but we do not have innovations, in a layman word, innovations can be tied up to what people always say, think outside the box. Meaning that if we look at certain thing, we see it from a different angle, how we can materialize that particular item. So in the context of Serba Dynamic, in our sustainability business model, we are saying that we need a wider ground of operations. We cannot depend only on Malaysia, because if any uncertainty and volatility in terms of political situations and so on and so forth, we have to accept the fact that business will be interrupted. So we expanded out of Malaysia so that we have a bigger ground or play field for us to depend on. So through this initiative, after we got ourselves listed, we have some money, we raised some funds and so on. So we are able to acquire technology company in Europe, and we have so far acquired a company in United Kingdom, we have acquired company in Switzerland, we have acquired company in the Netherlands, and also in Italy. And all these acquisitions, one important point that we put into the sales and purchase agreement is the transfer of technology back to Malaysia, transfer of technology into a region or locations where we are positioned very strongly. So meaning to say that that helps the growth of the company and positioning in those different locations. Innovation from the aspect that when the lockdown happened, it does not happen at the same time. For example, like Malaysia started somewhere in March, Middle East country took a little bit of time. Effective is somewhere around the end of April, May, June. And in Central Asia is a bit later on. So what we have done is the order books that we have in hand, we zoom it into it and we tell our regional people, go and meet the customer, try to convince them to draw down the order book so that it can be translated into sales and revenue. So all this happened over different months, and as a result of that, it helped us to mitigate the trajectory targeted sales and revenue that we have committed to our investors and also our shareholders. So I classified that as something innovative in terms of utilizing and looking at what we have in hand to mitigate our commitments of KPIs that we have put forward to our shareholders and investors. I would say that quite a lot of other real case studies, incidents, and so on, I would like to put that into the Q&A sessions to give ways to the other panelists to share their knowledge and experience to this particular session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dato'. Let's move on to Nimal, pardon my name. We have a few slides for you as well, right? All right, let's go ahead, Nimal.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Maybe let me start by just characterizing a bit the crisis, as you've talked about, that we find ourselves in, building a bit on what Tan Sri Andrew and Dato' Karim just talked about. As we looked at this as McKinsey, and as you can imagine, we operate in multiple countries, and we didn't want to have a broad brush approach to characterizing what we're going through. We came up with this framework, which basically frames what we're going through on 3 dimensions. And think about this as how to think about how deep different countries are going to go and what that recovery path will look like. Because if you think about the opportunities, I think we first need to understand what situation we are in first, and then we can talk about how to leverage this crisis as an opportunity. How you read this, it's a bit complex, I apologize, I won't go through in too much detail, but there's 3 things that characterize what a nation goes through in terms of COVID. The first thing is on the y-axis, the public health response. This starts and ends as a public health crisis. And depending on the effectiveness of the response for different nations, that defines the extent to which or the duration with which nations will find themselves in various stages of lockdown with the ripple-on effects that will have on the economy. On the bottom, you see the economic and policy response. And most nations have been fairly aggressive in terms of the policy response. And so, on the left-hand side, fairly ineffective, on the right-hand side, fairly effective. And when we do a poll of government leaders, of company leaders, of influencers, of economists, most folks think that we're going to be landing somewhere in the A1 to A3 range. So the middle column, so reasonably effective economic response, and most countries are throwing everything at this. But then the health response varies to some extent, both the policy itself as well as the willingness of the population to kind of abide by norms and the like. As the crisis progresses, you'll see a few countries in East Asia characterized more by what we would call A1, and there's many kind of alphabets being used to characterize the recovery, but more of a V-shaped recovery, and that would include likes of China, Korea, Japan, where they are second waves, they are third waves, but by and large, relatively under control. And others by A3, which is where you see multiple waves coming back and multiple lockdowns as a result associated with those waves. And as such, the economy taking longer to recover. Now, probably fair to say that Malaysia is somewhere in the middle between A1 and A3. So the health response, the policy response, there's a third very important function of this, which is the makeup of the economy. And this is important. economies which have a greater reliance on trade, a greater reliance on tourism, a greater reliance on remittances, a greater reliance on commodities will be worse hit. Now, that's going to be offset, of course, by the other parts of the economy in terms of services, in terms of the extent of digitization, and the extent of which we can turn this crisis into an opportunity. But the reality is that the Malaysian economy in Q2 saw a 17% compression. Bank Negara's most recent estimates expect between a 3.5% to a 5.5% compression for the year. Now, many countries are worse off. So, if you look at Singapore, for example, they are more exposed. They are much more of a trading nation than we are. Many other countries are more exposed as well. But this crisis, as Ibrahim said, is a crisis. And as McKinsey, we take more of an economic lens to it, as the numbers I just talked about, but it is a crisis. Now, to put it in context, because these are just numbers, what does this mean? And I wanted to use this chart because I found this chart quite instructive. Tan Sri Andrew made the point that this is the single biggest crisis since World War II. It is the single biggest crisis since World War II. We just went back 2 decades here. You contrast the GFC, the global financial crisis in 08-09. You contrast the AFC, the Asian financial crisis in 98. During the GFC, we contracted 2%. During the AFC, 7%. We are on track, according to Bank Negara, to be anywhere between 3.5% to 5.5%. And some of the polls we've taken suggest it could be a little bit worse. Now, we hope it's better, but that's the range, right? -2 to -9 that we are coming up with. So, by any measure, this is something we need to take very seriously. The government is taking it very seriously. We all are taking it very seriously. But it just puts it in context. This is what we are going through. So, enough doom and gloom. Pivoting then to how to turn crises into opportunity. This is how we think about it. And there's kind of 5 dimensions I wanted to frame, and then I'll hand over to my colleagues on the panel, and we can spend a bit more time on any particular one where there's appetite from the audience or the person who calls the shots. The first one is supporting return to work, and we are well and true underway that. By the way, many other nations are not. But category 1, as was observed just now, East Asia, we entered the crisis first and we're recovering first, and we're well through that. Number 2, 3, 4, and 5 are a bit more interesting. Number 2 is around increasing national resilience. And there's 2 aspects I'd call out. Number 1 around healthcare, and number 2 around food security. These are both essential. National resilience around healthcare, national resilience around food security, and what we do about that. The third element is accelerating our evolution to what we define as an advanced economy. Dr. Karim talked a bit about this in the context of innovation, technology, IR 4.0. That's 3.1, that's digital economy, that's IR 4.0, and it is essential. It is essential. And we are a fairly digital savvy nation. And so there's a lot of tailwind we have to help us. I'm sure you've all seen the cartoon strips, as you look at a company, what's been the greatest impetus or catalyst towards digital? Is it the CEO? Is it, McKinsey? Is it COVID? Unfortunately, it's not McKinsey, it's COVID. But in the interest, again, of turning a crisis into opportunity, many companies have been forced to do it. Many governments have been forced to do it. And digital is a catalyst that can help unlock a lot of value. Energy transition is talked about a bit less, but energy transition is something that plays again to our strengths, and we should be thinking about it. And finally, infrastructure. That's category number 2. How we use this crisis to kind of accelerate a transition towards a more advanced economy. Number 3 is how we create more confidence in Malaysia as a destination. The Deputy Minister initially in his keynote address talked about the fact that we are seeing, there's a lot of effort in terms of attracting investment. But how do we ensure that investors view Malaysia as a safe haven and money comes in? And money comes in at the rate that we need it to. How do we turn around tourism? And domestic tourism is up again, as we can all see. But and international will take a while. International travel will take a while, international tourism will take a while. But tourism as a category, we need to unlock. And number 3, supply chain. And supply chain is important. How we think about the supply chain of the core sectors that matter most to our industry. And half the problem is demand, but half the problem is equally the supply chain side, because there's so much disruption in core aspects of our economy. And number 5, we would broadly categorize as enablers. One is around just people, talent, reskilling. Later on during this panel, I'll share a slide that shows on the one hand, disruption that Malaysian talent will face, and not just Malaysian talent, but global talent will face, as the other aspects play out, because there's going to be a shift in what's needed by the economy, and that can be net negative or that can be net positive depending on how we react to it. And the last point here is a topic near and dear to my heart, which is this topic of SMEs and mid-tier companies. We rightfully spend a lot of time thinking about how to equip SMEs for this transition. Digitization, IR 4.0, the marketing revolution. We need to equally spend time equipping our mid-tier companies. So we've got about 1 million, just under 1 million, maybe 800,000 SMEs that account for about a third of our economy, maybe 40% now. We've got about 10,000 mid-tier companies that account for another third of our economy. And how do we equip them as well to help navigate this crisis? So let me stop there by just saying that there's many opportunities that this crisis unlocks. And we need to pull this, we need to kind of turn the keys to unlock these opportunities.
So we'll take a short break before we continue on this conversation. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. As promised, we continue on our conversation at Martrade for the E-National Exporters Day. On the panel, we have Tan Sri Andrew Shang, Nimal Manuel, Datuk Daud Baka, as well as Dr. Karim of Cerebral Dynamic. These are the conversations that we've had regarding the need for SMEs in particular to think about exporting their businesses, goods and services moving forward. Enjoy the conversation. Thank you, Nima. Let's draw back on some of the highlights that people tend to forget, which is, of course, the Asian financial crisis, the global financial crisis. Of course, Dr. Daud, you've been there. You went through both crises, and currently, overlooking this particular one that is particularly unique. Would you draw upon your experience into how you navigate this particular environment that we're in right now?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ibrahim. Thank you, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, a very good morning. I'm both humbled and honored to be invited to speak with the other great speakers and panelists. Thank you, Martrade, for having me this morning. I think we have a very big topic to discuss. We have three key, heavy keywords: crisis, opportunities, and most challenging would be transformation or transforming crisis into opportunities. And that will require a lot of mental courage, a lot of ability to reflect and to ponder, and to be able to create our own narrative as far as Malaysia is concerned, our own narrative, putting our own variable into our own structured thinking, how to navigate the crisis and how to move forward, taking all the opportunities and would-be opportunities, or a kind of silver lining, if you like, situation that are coming across, to our path. I have listened I have enjoyed listening to all the speakers just now. I think the way that I do things, day in and day out, I focus on financial sector and technology, big data and AI. I have to say that, you know, the crisis that we're having is going to stay for many, many years to come. And it's good to frame our mind that we need to forget about COVID-19 and what is coming beyond. It's good to start thinking of new things, of doing our thing. With or without finding the solution for COVID-19, this norm will continue for many, many years to come. So this is the mindset that we hope that the Malaysian entrepreneurs and Malaysian companies should be able to be equipped with and embedded with. As you know, when we look through the global megatrend in the last how many years, for the last 10 years, if I can quote those findings, they were focused on few verticals which are important: urbanization, aging population, digitalization, and sustainability. And Datuk Karim mentioned about some of them, technology, innovation under digitalization, and sustainability issue as well. So I think this has been the focus for many, many years to come. And as we speak for the current trend, I have seen many requests coming from all over the world asking for anything to do with digital products, QWC, to know your customer digital program, due diligence using the technology, and they're willing to put tons of money, millions of money, just to get that ready for their company, because they cannot travel anymore and they cannot access the companies overseas in the old way they used to do things. So they need to be transformed. This is transforming crisis into opportunities, and we are hoping that Malaysian can see the future and try to take this opportunity to be the first of the first to become the creator of this kind of technology.
That was my conversation with this illustrious panel. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astroawani.com, look for Notepad over there. Plenty of interviews like this can be found on that particular channel and on that particular page. You can also watch these kind of shows on your mobile devices. Just download the Astro AWANI app wherever you get the application. Until then, thanks very much for watching and goodbye.